Okay. AZA here? Yes, great. We are going to start with AZA Elsa talking from neuroarts to collective meaning.
Thank you. And it's great to be here to share some of the work. My name's AZA. I'm an artist and physician scientist. My lab and art explore music, mindfulness, and psychedelics as parts to healing and facilitating social connection. And I do this primarily through my roles at Yale and Howard, which is on land that was, violently taken, and it encourages us to also think about our current relationship to the land and how we steward it for ourselves and future generations. I have two conflicts of interest with companies I founded that work at the intersection of arts and science community building. And of course, it would be no surprise to you all that music has always been really essential to all of our early healing systems, while in modern medicine it's mostly on the periphery or seen as an adjunct. And in all different cultures where we look ethnographically, we see music serving both an explicit and implicit social function. And so one of the things that we were really excited about, me and my co-PI, legendary bassist, Victor Wooten, we were able to get this award to look at the impact of live music for anxiety in individuals with dementia and their caregivers. And so the way that we did this is that we got people to come into live spaces where music would be played. They would listen to familiar music, unfamiliar music, and autobiographically significant music. They would also then come back into the same space where they would watch a video controlled at the same decibels, where they would look at a pre-recorded show of some of the same songs, unfamiliar and familiar songs, and we counterbalance the order to control for order effects. And so while people were in the space, we had multiple EEGs, EKGs, psychometrics, really multiplexing the physiology as they listen. And so this allows us to not only look at individual physiological dynamics, but importantly, the dynamics that happens within a group. We were able to record from up to 10 people at a time while they listen to something like this. The volume. This is one of our trios. This is the Joseph Wooten Trio. He plays with the Steve Miller Band. We had a lot of really, really great musicians. So we have some preliminary data that I want to share with you. Again, some of what we know intuitively, right? This idea about live bodies and us responding to live bodies. But when we look at live versus pre-recorded music, looking at multiple different metrics for heart rate variability, we see that there are differences across the population looking at both live and pre-recorded music. Also, when we look at individuals with dementia, as well as their age-matched controls, we see different autonomic responses to the music. And when we look at the EEG activity across different frequency bands, on the left are individuals with dementia, on the right are their caregiver. This is during the same session. And then the difference score is on the right. This is 21 lead EKG. Again, we see some differences here, and it's too early to really give an interpretation, and we're still really combing through a lot of data to look at the synchrony, but this just gives a sense of the kind of data that we can get. And I think importantly, this idea that when we study these sorts of dynamics in groups, and in dyads, we actually uncover new physiology that we don't get when we're studying individuals in isolation. Another big part of this idea is how do we take this information and translate it into lived experiences that the community can then digest and inhabit. And so with this, we launched my artistic project, Music for the Collective, which gave us an opportunity to really synthesize over 7 years of work that we've done in our lab, as well as the literature, to provide an evidence-based experiential for the community where we could then also use that as a scaffold to explain how the science works. We were able to debut this last year at the Kennedy Center to a sold-out show, and also did the Schwarzman Center and a number of different places. So I want to show you what this looks like in a performance that we did at the National Academy of Sciences.
Music, art, health, cultural programs of the National Academy of Sciences and LabX curated an afternoon where sound became a conduit for connection. Music for the Collective was a collaborative event bringing art, culture, and healing together through the transformative sounds of the Dr. AZA Trio.
This intersection between music and art. Throughout my career, it always felt like two very separate paths. There was me as the scientist, the biology major, taking those classes. Then there was me as the musician in jazz studies, doing jazz combo. But those things didn't really integrate for me. And it was actually a big point of tension intrinsically, because I felt like there was a way for this to connect, but there weren't many pathways in my training to do that. And so as I actually became a psychiatrist and got into residency, was when I started to really see that there was this really powerful space to bring music and the arts into healing. Everything that we did today was evidence-based. Right? We've done studies in our lab to show that playing music together, playing percussions together, synchronizes heart rhythms, increases parasympathetic activity. That's the part of the body that helps us to rest. The music mindfulness exercise that we did, right, also increases autonomic nervous system activity in a way that promotes healing and promotes rest. There are all these formulas that music in the popular realm use a lot. Like this is a very common one in jazz. So 2-5-1. And one of the things we found in our lab, for instance, is that chord progression specifically activates certain neural networks in the brain that are important for social networking. It's important for connecting, the way that people pay attention to certain cues. Yet still, we know that social connection is actually vital to our health. It can be as dangerous as smoking cigarettes to be socially isolated. And in mental health, no matter what the diagnosis is, pretty much all symptoms become worse if someone is socially isolated. I've learned that love requires vulnerability, and the scariness that comes with it is a part of that process. It's like there's an element of surrender that we have to partake in order to receive love and in order to give love. And when we can learn to do that, it can really free us up to connect in a deeper way.
Music is not just art and not just science. It is a bridge. It works on the body, the mind, the brain, and the spirit. It fosters individual healing, strengthens community bonds, and even powers social movements. By integrating science and music, we don't just study health, we create it.
So with this work, we really try to create a cycle in which we can take rigorous approaches to understand the physiology, the biology of music, how it can be used to treat multiple symptoms and drive social connection, and then get that information and experience back to the community in a fast fashion while we also do the publications and the randomized trials and everything like that. So I want to thank the people in my lab. Thank you all for listening. And one other thing I want to say is that today is a special day because it's my daughter's birthday. Who's 12. So happy birthday to her. And that will be my last embarrassing thing for today. Thank you all.
Yeah.
Happy birthday to you. Her name is Heidi.
Birthday, dear Heidi. Happy birthday to you. That's the best question that's been asked yet at the conference. Thank you. Yes. Yeah. Oh, okay, all right.
I was just wondering how much these multiple identities affect with your clinical practice too. It's so amazing to see you have your artist self and the researcher self, and you're saying that there wasn't a lot of avenues to integrate those. How is that? How do those things integrate into your clinical work? All those different sides.
Yeah, so it integrates one in terms of how I work with patients. So music and arts are central to most of the work that I do, whether it's connecting or ways to explore emotions. But another sort of really satisfying work clinically has been exposing the next generation of medical students and residents both to the clinical literature and the evidence, but also giving them ideas about models that they can use with their patients. And that's been really gratifying. Thank you all.
Thanks. Oh. So our next speaker is Catherine Cotter from UPenn. Catherine, hey.
Thank you. So hopefully over these past couple of days, you've been able to wander around the city a little bit, maybe encounter some of the fabulous public art in the city. And so I am based in Philly, and so I'll be sharing some of the early stage exploratory work that we've been doing, trying to understand people's experiences with public art specifically. And so in my body of work, I'm quite interested in that intersection between art and flourishing. And oftentimes this is studied in the museum with kind of more fine art context, more formalized art context. And we see benefits to people's emotional well-being. They feel happier, more energized. They feel connected to one another through their engagement with visual art, and just a greater sense of vitality, engagement in their life more broadly. But when we think about public art, it exists in a different kind of way. We engage with it in a different type of way in different spaces. It's more widely accessible because it's out in the public. You don't necessarily have to pay to see a mural on the wall or a sculpture or monument out in the real world. It's often place specific. So you heard a little bit yesterday from Matt from the Mural Arts Philadelphia, kind of speaking about how they're very intentional about where they're creating, who they're creating for, who's existing in that community, because the work is installed in a specific space and often has resonance with those communities. And I got ahead of my animation. So it often represents those communities, and in many cases, particularly with the Mural Arts program here in Philadelphia, is done in conjunction and in discussion and dialogue with the communities who are in that particular area of the city. But there's not a ton of work kind of getting into people's understandings about how people perceive the impacts of public art, and how people are actually engaging with it, and the kind of aesthetic appraisals that they might be making of deciding that they're finding this particular artwork beautiful or meaningful or culturally salient or personally salient for their own lives. And so we were interested in trying to start unpacking these questions from kind of a mixed method exploratory way. And so first, we just conducted a online sample with US adults, capturing about 80 participants, to understand their perspectives on how public art maybe impacts their community, how it might relate to their own sense of health and well-being, what role it plays in an urban environment, since this is oftentimes where we're seeing a lot of this public art being produced, and the role of cultural representation and how that kind of intersects with how the community is seen and represented in the artworks. And through these kind of open-ended survey responses, we conducted kind of an iterative thematic analysis through a coder consensus process to come to a set of themes related to people's general perceptions on public art. And so the first theme was really about the individual level impact on their own emotions or well-beings, with a couple exemplar quotes saying that it helps not just their emotional health, but the mental health too. It's like an antidepressant for my whole being. I really loved this quote when it popped up. I was like, I love when they're giving me these great quotes. But it also makes people feel happier overall, more content, more joyful. But a lot of people also spoke about the ways in which their encounters with public art can promote reflection, particularly reflection on a personal level, kind of thinking about themselves and their kind of self-understanding, but also at a sociocultural level of what's happening in society. So, for example, one participant spoke of a particular mural that they encountered and that it really made them stop and think about how far the civil rights movement has come, and yet there's still so much more that needs to be done. So it's happening both at this kind of self-understanding, but thinking more broadly about the world and society. It also helps to provide social experiences, both in feeling connections to others, feeling like they are being seen and that they have these shared experiences with others, that it can bring people together and actually look up from their phones, a very exciting thing in this particular time, and experience something together, even if you're not actually directly engaging with someone, even if no words are exchanged, you do feel connected by those around you who are also witnessing the art before them. So there's this shared kind of space aspect to a lot of public art. There's this shared sense of having the same experience, even if you're not directly engaging with others, or there's no one around, but you know other people have encountered that art previously. There's also a sense that it enhances the urban environment. So it's brightening up older buildings, giving people a sense that people do still care about the community. So it's also seen as this metric potentially of public investment or community investment in their spaces. You're seeing that with some of the reflections Matt had about the work happening in Kensington for those traumatized populations. And that it also just gives a sense of character and kind of distinguishes these locations. And then a really interesting theme that came out of this was this notion of ease of engagement. And so this is accessible, that it can be for some people part of the routine. If you have a particular commute like I do into Penn's campus, I know which murals I'm going to pass on like the bus ride in, and know like when I need to like look up from whatever I'm doing to kind of enjoy it as I'm passing by. So it becomes kind of this familiar comfort that I can rely on during my day. But a lot of people also spoke about this notion of surprise and discovery, because maybe this happened to you just walking around the city. You maybe turn a corner and like come across something. I know I don't spend a lot of time in this part of the city, but I was walking down the street with some colleagues and saw in the behind kind of a storefront a lot of mosaic work, and really kind of dug into some of the other kind of mosaic work in the city. So there's this notion of surprise and discovery. But to follow up this qualitative work, we also wanted to dig into people's experiences of both different murals as well as sculptural installation works in the city, and understand if we just stop people on the street and ask, what are your evaluations of how beautiful or meaningful this work is, and what is your sense of connection with well-being? And so we conducted multiple regression analyses to see which appraisals maybe are standing out in a public art space predictive of some of these well-being or flourishing outcomes. And so we asked people how better versus worse, connected versus isolated, included versus excluded they felt when looking at that work. And for both feeling better and more connected, when they found the work more beautiful or meaningful, they said they felt better or more connected. And just if it was more meaningful, that they feel more included. In terms of finding the work thoughtful versus, or feeling thoughtful versus bored, more positive versus negative, or relaxed versus stressed. Again, we see beauty and meaning promoting more feelings of thoughtfulness. When we're getting at more positive, feeling more positive, cultural relevance starts popping out. So feeling that is connecting to their kind of cultural representation in addition to that beauty and meaningfulness. And then for feeling more relaxed, again, this cultural relevance, feeling seen, and as well, finding the work beautiful was associated with feeling higher levels of relaxation. So very, very early stage exploratory work, but it's kind of telling us that people are perceiving these benefits to these much more accessible in their community artworks. And so it definitely deserves more attention, particularly understanding how people are thinking about and seeing and evaluating these works, as is classic in a lot of the empirical aesthetics literature, but we need to also be turning this to the notion of public art as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Catherine. Yeah, time for one question.
Yeah, this is so fantastic. And something that I have run into in my own conversations with community members about public art is this is very true for those who notice it, that it really, really increases quality of life. But something that I've run into in, conversations is oftentimes people aren't noticing it because in something like a museum or a gallery setting, we have these very physical cues to that, you are in an art space. This is a space where you go, you look at art, you enjoy the art. And I'm really curious if you've thought about, looked into how we can provide some of those same physical prompts to look up from your phone, get out of your own head, and actually take in the beauty of the art around you, and if that's something you've looked into at all.
Yeah, so that'd be a great thing. So in that second study, I literally sent my lovely RAs onto the streets of Philly to stop random people, be like, hey, you want to look at art and do a survey for us? We got like 300 people to do it in like a couple months. So it actually worked pretty well. But I'll just go back to one of the images. And this was like one of the funniest kind of stories. So this middle image is right in front of an apartment building near Penn's campus. And a lot of people we stopped were like, oh, that's not like construction scaffolding, that's art. So there is so even if it's like, it is a sculpture, it is like this big work that you can interact with and like walk through the bells, people are not necessarily even recognizing some of these things as art. But if it was like in front of like a museum, you'd be like, huh, look at the bells, and right? So there are these lacks of cues and things that we don't have in these senses. So I've seen in other cities, there's kind of like things on the sidewalk that kind of make you see, because you're like watching where you're walking and it's like pointing to a mural or something like that. So there could be some physical cues. I think part of it is just societal shifts to have that more sense of presence and sense of mind, which that's a hard thing to intervene on and try to solve. But I think that's kind of a place of just like sense of awareness and rather that kind of like more insular focus, but hard thing to solve for sure, but something we are definitely thinking about. How do we get people to be more present in these spaces?
Thank you, Catherine. And our next speaker is Yaxine Liu.
Hello everyone, my name is Yaxing, and today I'm going to talk about a project on story writing. So many of us have used ChatGPT or some AI tools at some point this year or a few years ago. So the AI adoption has really increased since 2022. So more and more people use GPT or some other AI tools to improve writing, to draft emails, and even for some creative work like story writing. So the problem is, as we've seen from many talks since day 1 and day 2, the problem is the stories, if you use with AI, tend to be more similar with each other. So we have this problem of homogeneity because AI tends to generate very similar content. The problem, so the issue is that if writing seems better with AI, then what is lost during this process? The central question of this project is to look at how does AI chatbot influence story writing. To investigate this, we have participants who did both the human-only condition and the AI-assisted condition. So participants were presented with 3 prompt words: stamp, send, and letter. And maybe you take a moment to think about what story would you write within 4 sentences. So it's not a trivial or easy task. So participants in the human-only condition had 5 minutes to come up with a short story that include all 3 words. And in the AI condition, so about 1 week after they completed human-only condition, they chat with a chatbot. So this is an interface that have this almost like the ChatGPT interface, so they can ask any prompt questions on the left, and then they have a sketchpad area to draft any notes. And then once they feel ready about their stories, then they can submit in the final submission box. So the key comparison here is with the human-only condition and the AI-assist condition. So this is a within subject design that really allows us to see what the writing has changed and with the same prompt and same condition. So as you can see here, so in terms of the semantic space, the AI and so the blue dots represent the AI assist condition and red dots are the human only condition. So the embedding space really doesn't differ that much. So meaning that the content, so content-wise, the stories really didn't change that much. So what drive this change between the AI condition and the human only condition? So we're seeing that basically, it's not really about the topics, but really the themes that are covered in either condition. So to get a sense of this content, I grouped the prompt-related themes categories and compared how often these themes appeared. So you can see that most themes show up in both conditions. The biggest AI contrast showed the growth and future-oriented language. So you see that AI condition tends to show more future-oriented words, and the strongest human-only contrast points toward the achievement and work. So humans seems to like to talk about their achievements and whatever they put into these stories. So these are the two biggest contrasts, and all other themes are more or less similar between these two conditions.
The email. Am I on break?
And before we go on to the creativity part, let me just tell you a little bit more about how the creativity was scored. So computational scoring has been very active in the past few years. So we basically also use the GPT to score creativity writings, but we also validated with human raters. So we showed a very nice correlation in either the AI condition and the human-only condition. As you can see, the correlations are pretty good. So meaning that so the GPT rated stories were more aligned with human ratings. So that gives us some confidence to use these AI or GPT rated stories as the ground, not the perfect judge, but more or less still very reliable in terms of the creativity ratings. So here I'm going to show you the data here. So on the x-axis, you can see the comparison between human-only and AI-assisted condition, and on the y-axis, so on the left, that's the creativity score, and on the left is the creativity score. On the right is the semantic distance. So you can see that in both measures, AI condition showed higher scores in both creativity and semantic distance. So meaning that, so in terms of creativity scores, they were rated higher, and also the language at the word level were also more varied and novel. But the pattern changes when we look at the mental state language. So what really gets changed between these two conditions? In the AI-assisted stories, you see that there were fewer words about thoughts, feelings, and intentions. And this really matters because participants were not just writing any story, they were told to write story about themselves. So they have to use some personal experiences to write about these stories. So in the AI-assisted condition, this loss is really unfortunate to some point. And so here is a more detailed breakdown. So you can see that the most change happened in the intention words as well as the cognitive process words. So participants used less words to describe how they think and how they want to do something. So the main takeaway from this study is that there's a trade-off from using AI-assisted tools, at least in terms of story writing. AI can help people find better words and seems like shinier on the surface level, but when you dig deeper into what's is described in these stories. So they use fewer feelings and even less intentional words. So is this a good or bad thing? So we don't know at this point, but for a lot of people who are very into creative writing, I think what's really important is to have their own expression and meaning conveyed in their writings. So the implication is for any creative professionals, is this really needed or do they really want to use AI? So yeah, so this is an open question and I think there will be more research in the next coming years. So thank you everyone and I'd like to thank my collaborators and especially Reid Patel to collect the data at Penn State. Right, thank you and happy to take any questions.
Great. Time for one question. Question. Okay.
Thank you for an interesting talk, but I wonder if there weren't some other parameters here. Were these professional writers, people who know how to write and express their feelings?
Yeah, that's a good question. These are not professional writers. These were college students.
So that sort of tells us something. The second is, were they people with experience in using chatbots?
Yeah, so we're pretty confident that at this point, most students are pretty confident or have been using GPT for a while. So we also have other tasks that ask them to use GPT. So yes, so at least in terms of the familiarity, they're pretty used to using some AI chatbots.
Because when professional writers use such tools, they guide it in very different ways than students who seem to just use it in an unguided way. I think the results are surprisingly similar, but the way you get them is different.
Okay.
Yeah.
Maxine, go ahead.
So I think so we don't have professional writers, so we don't know, but you can see that in the recent years you see a lot of AI generated stories, not necessarily initiated by humans, but definitely there are more and more people use the GPT to assist with writing, not just like story writing, but any kind of writings.
All right, thank you. Okay, and then our next speaker is Danny Holtzman.
Hey everyone, my name is Danny. I'm a PhD student at Georgetown working with Adam. And today I'm going to talk about a project looking at a classroom-based intervention to improve creativity in adolescence. So we'll switch gears a little bit. This project looks specifically at scientific creativity, which is of course critical for solving a lot of society's challenges. And scientific creativity, like many other forms of creativity that we've seen, seems to rely on this coupling between these two brain networks, the default mode network and the frontal parietal control network, or FPCN. And given the growing interest in enhancing scientific creativity at younger ages in classrooms, we wanted to explore whether an intervention in the classroom could improve creativity and if we could determine if this coupling is playing a role. And one promising intervention is called the Scientific Creativity in Practice, or SCIP program. This was developed by researchers in Austria and is really kind of based on the idea that creativity is not one single skill, but is rather a collection of many cognitive processes. So many different components of the activities that are implemented will show that. So instead of being a whole new curriculum, the SCIP program is rather several activities and techniques that teachers learn to implement into their existing curriculum. These touch on things like brainstorming and associative thinking and imagination. And prior evidence has shown that the SCIP program can improve scientific creativity, in particular around flexibility and fluency, but the neural mechanisms for why that's happening remains to be understood. So we worked with 4 science teachers who went through workshops learning these SCIP techniques. This was in Arlington, Virginia, with the public school system there. These teachers were teaching chemistry and computer science, and we recruited students from their classrooms. We had 27 participants in the study. The experimental group was in classes where teachers were implementing the SCIP methods, and the control group were students in the same courses taught by the same teachers, but just their normal curriculum without the intervention. It was a relatively diverse sample in regards to race and ethnicity, but due to some chance demographic differences between the groups, we included several variables when we get to the analyses. So in this study, participants completed all the procedures at 2 time points, before and after the intervention period. All the procedures, that includes this battery of tasks, as well as we collected neural data using SfNCs, happened at their schools, which was fun to get to go and actually make it a little bit more realistic, testing from their classrooms. But this does mean bringing the SfNCs system there too. So if you have questions about moving a 100-pound portable SfNCs system, come chat with me afterwards. And then for the behavioral battery, the task that we'll focus on here, our main scientific creativity task, is called the DPAS. This asks participants to come up with as many solutions to scientific problems as they can. And we scored this for fluency, the number of ideas generated, and flexibility, the number of different categories those solutions fell under. During SfNCs recording, participants did 2 tasks. One was the creativity task. This was a scientific hypothesis generation. They were shown a scenario and had to come up with a creative, but still scientifically plausible solution or reason for that scenario potentially happening. This was scored using a neural network-based scoring method. And the control task was a synonym task, where they just came up with the most appropriate synonym they could for a given word. We had a cap that participants wore that held the aptodes and the sources and detectors in place, resulting in 60 measurement channels. Data underwent standard pre-processing and cleaning, and we used wavelet transform coherence to compute functional connectivity between channel pairs. We then determined which channels were belonging to the DMN and FPCN by using Atlas Viewer to project our layout onto a cortex. And we used linear mixed effects models to determine if there was a condition effect on changes in coupling. All right, so jumping into the results. Looking at that main task of scientific creativity, the DPAS, we did find a significant time by condition interaction in which the SCIP intervention improved flexibility over time compared to the control group. In post-hoc analyses, we see that flexibility significantly increased from T1 to T2 in the SCIP group, and the control group had no change over time. For the hypothesis task during the SfNCs recording, we didn't find an effect of condition on either the scientific creativity score, or more or less an originality score, or on reaction time. And then looking at the SfNCs data, we saw what we thought we would see in our hypothesis, that there are these regions of the DMN and FPCN. Specifically, what we saw here was that the angular gyrus, a region of the DMN, and the DLPFC, a key hub of the FPCN, increased in coupling for the SCIP group and not for the control group. Okay, so now we saw this improvement in flexibility, an increase in coupling. So we wanted to see if potentially this increase in coupling was explaining some of the improvement in behavior. So we ran an exploratory mediation model to test this. I do want to point out that the flexibility result we see here is not, weren't recording SfNCs data during that time. So this is comparing a behavioral task to bring coupling during a separate, although a pretty related task, but I just want to point that out. And the results show that there is a potential mediation. It's an almost significant, a trend level indirect effect with a p-value of 0.056. But in particular, this means that when putting in the coupling into the model, our direct effect no longer is significant. And this is maybe showing that we are having some sort of mediation for explaining how the SCIP program is improving flexibility. Okay, so just to wrap up, I want to point out a few things. We did replicate findings to show that SCIP does improve creative flexibility in a science task. There was no effect on our more originality task, but previous work hasn't actually shown improvements in originality. The SCIP program really does focus more on flexibility and fluency, and we found a potential mechanism that might explain how this is happening. And a huge thank you to the whole team that made this possible. Adam in our lab, collaborator Roger Beatty and his lab were part of all of this. And doctors Wolfgang Aschauer and Kurt Heim, who developed the SCIP program, work closely with the teachers. And of course, the teachers in our public schools that made this possible. So thank you.
Thanks, Danny. Okay, yeah. One question. If there are questions. Gotta be quick. We're running out of time. So if you want to raise your hand, now's your chance. All right.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. So our next speaker is Caroline de Bernardi Luft. And she is located in the UK and was hoping to be here, but some visa complications came up, which was a real bummer. She's a member of our executive committee and really wanted to be a big part of the meeting. We're sad that it didn't work out, but she's recorded her talk for us, and so we'll get to hear from Caro now.
Hello, everyone. I hope you're enjoying the conference. I am devastated I couldn't come because my US visa was rejected. However, I am really happy to be able to present some of my recent work via this recording. This study I will present today was done as a fully synchronized EEG hyperscan setup in which we monitor the EEG signals, facial expressions, and dialogue. Today, I will focus on the question on how face-to-face brainstorming affects creativity, semantic convergence, and emotional expression. So you can decide, should we meet face-to-face? To answer this question, we use a design task. So participants are required to come up with ideas for creative products to solve specific problems. We used two problems. For example, the first one was people with hearing impairments may not notice fire alarms, leading to compromise safety, and that was our second problem. In this experiment, we had participants first working alone, individually, so they had an idea generation period for convergent thinking. They then evaluated their answers, selected their answers, and then they had the final 5 minutes to think and provide their final solution, which was their first solution. After this, they were asked to discuss with their peer, brainstorm new ideas to solve this problem. And then after these 5 minutes of discussion, they were asked to come up with a final solution. The main experimental manipulation here was the discussion in which in one condition they had the face-to-face conversation, and in the other condition they had their visual blocked. So they had a block between them, and they just could talk, but they couldn't see each other. Importantly, the order of these conditions was, of course, counterbalanced. So this was a fully meeting participant study. We had 104 participants, 29 pairs of friends, and 3 pairs of strangers. I'm not going to be talking about this comparison today, but if you have any questions, you can ask. The data on the friends and strangers is also very interesting. We looked at creativity, semantic conversion, and emotion expressed in this presentation. And I will tell you the results now. When speaking face-to-face is more beneficial to creativity, we measure design creativity of their first and final solutions using the 8 algorithm. And what we found was that in both non-face-to-face in red and face-to-face in blue, creativity increased after the discussion. So they increased significantly no matter which condition. We then ask, is speaking face-to-face more beneficial to changing ideas? We use 2 free energy measures of semantic exploration to investigate this. You can check the QR code or preprint explaining the logic of these measures. It's a different paper, but the measures logic are described there. The first one is Bayesian surprise, which can be interpreted as how far the participant's idea went from the original problem space. And you can see in the graph that both in the non-face-to-face and the face-to-face conditions, Bayesian surprise increased after discussion. So the effect of session is highly significant, but it didn't interact with the condition. So Bayesian surprise increased regardless. The second measure was Bayesian surprise update, which can be interpreted as reflecting the degree to which a participant's new solution moved away from the semantic space of their initial solution. So basically a measure of how much they changed between their first and the last idea after talking to the participants. And you can see that the comparison between the non-face and face-to-face conditions, the BS update was slightly higher in the face-to-face condition. So participants updated or they changed a bit more their semantic space when they're speaking face-to-face as compared to non-face-to-face. But that was just a trend. It was not significant. We then asked, does talking face-to-face result in more similar ideas? We calculated the similarity scores between the answers of the pair in the pre and in the post discussion periods using the BERT algorithm. So you can see more information about that in the paper in the QR code. We observed that responses converge significantly after the discussion. So in both face-to-face and non-face-to-face conditions, semantic convergence increased. It increased slightly higher in the face-to-face condition, but the results were not significant. We then asked, does it matter how similar our first idea was? So we split the groups based on the similarity scores before they talk to each other. Then we compare the Bayesian surprise update between these 2 groups, comparing face-to-face versus not. What we found was that having high initial similarity, having very similar initial responses, resulted in no difference between face-to-face and not face-to-face Bayesian surprise update. Whereas if the participants started from a lower similarity level, so their responses were more different, then being face-to-face resulted in a higher Bayesian surprise update. So it does mean that having face-to-face contact might help when people are initially very different and have different ideas, so they can benefit more from this contact. After the participants gave their final solution, we asked how much creativity of your final solution can be attributed to your peer. So we wanted to address that whether talking face-to-face might change how we assign credit for the ideas. And the answer is that partners get more credit when the face is visible. So you can see here in blue that the average credit attributed to the peer, to the idea, was higher when they were in face-to-face contact. So participants who talk face-to-face rated the peers' contributions as higher. Well, how about emotions? Do we express different emotions when talking face-to-face? So we use Human AI to analyze the emotions displayed by each participant during the discussion. What we found in the positive emotions, you can see here in the average emotional display of several nuanced emotions, that when they're speaking face-to-face, it demonstrated remarkably higher intensity for positive emotions. And at the same time, as you can see in the plot below, they showed lower negative emotions. So not seeing face-to-face was associated with higher confusion, boredom, sadness, and displays of anxiety, etc. So it looks like seeing face-to-face was associated with stronger positive and lower negative emotional expressions. Other question we ask is, do we synchronize more our emotional expressions when we are face-to-face? So we analyze the correlation of the emotional expressions during each of these discussions and compare them face-to-face. And you can see there in blue that the synchronization of these emotions, the correlation between them during face-to-face is much higher than compared to non-face-to-face. This is extremely significant. We also found that both positive and negative emotions were more synchronized in the face-to-face conditions. So whereas we displayed more positive emotions in the face-to-face interactions, we synchronized more, both positive and negative emotions, while speaking face-to-face. Finally, is emotion and emotional synchrony different for participants who showed high creativity after the discussion? So we answered this question by splitting the groups between higher and lower creativity at the end, their final answer. And we observed that high creativity was associated with significantly higher emotional synchrony, but only when seen face-to-face. And you can see here in red, you have the higher creativity group, and in blue, the lower creativity group, and you can see that the synchrony scores are much higher for participants in the high creativity group. So you can see that these are all the positive emotions that you're seeing in front of you. Now you can see that this is also the case for the negative emotions. So participants with higher creativity not only synchronize more their positive emotions, but also their negative emotions overall. Interesting, there was no significant effect on emotional expressions per se, so the effect was specific to synchrony, and the effects were non-significant for when the communication were not face-to-face, so it was necessary that they looked at each other. To summarize, discussing face-to-face does not necessarily increase creativity more than talking without seeing. However, participants converge into closer semantic spaces with each other, but they move away from their initial semantic space when they talk. Face-to-face discussion might favor people who started from different semantic spaces. They had different ideas to start with. Talking face-to-face was associated with more positive and less negative emotional expressions, and also with stronger emotional synchrony between two participants. And people who showed higher creativity after the discussion synchronized more with their peers during the discussion. Thank you so much for listening. For questions, comments, or general praise, please email me at caroline.luft@brunel.ac. Thank you so much. Have a lovely rest of the conference. So jealous of you.